So, hey, if you're just joining us, we are descending our way through the book of Judges. And I say descending on purpose because there is a cycle to the book. Over and over, God's people reject him. God allows an enemy to come in and oppress them. They cry out to God. He sends a judge, a better word is deliverer, to rescue them and defeat their enemy. And then there is peace in the land as long as the judge is around. And that's the cycle. We've kind of been hinting and pointing to that every week. And the first judge in that cycle, way back in the beginning of the book, chapter 3, was a great guy. He was a good guy. He was a white hat. He brings the bad guys to justice. But with each turn of the cycle, a new judge comes that's a little bit worse than the last, a little bit worse, and there's this downward spiral. And so we've descended in Judges for 13 chapters now, and God the people of God reject him again, and God gives them into the hands of the Philistines, their worst enemy yet. And what God's people need is a hero. They need a wonderful, a powerful deliverer, and what they will get is Samson. Now, maybe you hear Samson, and you have this superhero kind of guy in your head. That's not really what's here. Reality is that Samson is by far the most flawed judge in the entire book. He's violent, he's impulsive, he's out of control sexually, he's selfish, he's immature, he's hardly hero material. And in these two chapters, 14 and 15, sorry, Joel, we're not going to get to the hair part this week, but in 14 and 15, we're going to cover this story very quickly. And last week, we covered Samson's birth announcement that God would literally raise him up as a baby to begin the deliverance from the Philistines. And now in these two chapters, our bouncy little deliverer is all grown up. The last line of his birth story tells us that God was stirring something up in him. But one verse later, we read this: Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and mothers, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. And so Samson is now being stirred by something else entirely, right? It's the girl of his dreams. The problem with this is that the girl of his dreams is a Philistine. His parents object. Samson, God has sent you to save us from the Philistines, and now you want to marry one of them. They're the enemy. They try to talk him out of it, but he doesn't listen to them all at all. He says, she's the one, for she is right in my eyes. And that's what I want you to underline and highlight in your Bible, in your mind at least. This phrase that Samson uses, she is right in my eyes. If there's a line that defines Samson's life, it's this one. This could be his life verse, right? Not a real good one. All of Samson's flaws and troubles will stem from this cancerous statement, it's right in my eyes. Now, we don't read how, but Samson wins the fight with his parents, and so Samson goes to the Philistine town of Timnah to get this girl. And I want you to look where they go. It says they go to the vineyards of Timnah. That will be important for us. While they are in the vineyards, there's a roaring lion that comes and charges at Samson. And he doesn't have anything in his hand, and still he's able to tear the lion into pieces like you would a young goat. That's what the text says. And I mean, all of us have torn apart our fair share of young goats, am I right? Like it was like that. It's the first time Samson gets a sense of the kind of strength that is at his disposal. He doesn't tell his parents that this happened because he has a date that he needs to get to. And the girl in Timnah means more and more trips to see her. And so on one of them, Samson revisits the place where he tore the lion apart. And he finds a swarm of bees has moved into the lion's decaying body cavity, and he does what is right in his eyes. He takes some of the honey from the lion, he eats it, He takes it to his parents and shares the honey with them, but he does not tell them where he got it. And so for the second time, he keeps the lion a secret from them. Samson's courtship blooms into a wedding. And the custom was to throw a massive party. And so the wedding is not in his town, it's in hers. And so it's a real bummer to throw a party when you don't know anybody. And so the family is nice enough to provide some companions, that's what they're called, for the party. They're not his friends, they're the friends of his in-laws that they invite to have a party. And at the party, Samson does what is right in his eyes. He wants to prove that he is a little better than these new Philistine friends, that he's superior, and so he poses a riddle to them. Now, that was a very common way to prove dominance over somebody else, to test their intelligence like that. And the riddle is essentially a bet. He says this: if you can solve my riddle, there are 30 of you, and so if you solve the riddle, then I'll outfit all 30 of you with suits straight off of the GQ cover, even down to the boxers. But if you can't solve the riddle, then you owe me 30 suits. Now, his new friends take the bet. And here's Samson's riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Now, you and I know the answer because we've just covered it. It's honey from the lion that we just learned about. But these companions, they don't know that. For 3 days, they try to think, but they cannot solve the riddle. And on day 4, they realize that they're now going to be out 30 suits to Samson, and so they adopt a new strategy entirely. They go to Samson's bride-to-be, and they blackmail her. They say, get Samson to tell you the answer so that you can then tell it to us. And if you don't, we will burn your house down with you and your father still in it. She's super glad that these guys were invited to the party. Samson's bride is now trapped. She doesn't want to be burned alive. I mean, imagine that. And so she goes to Samson and she turns on the charm and the puppy dog eyes, and he cannot resist. And he tells her the answer to the riddle, and then she tells them to save herself and her father. And in this long story, Samson now becomes the victim. And it won't be the last time that this kind of sequence happens in his life. The end result is that Samson has to pay the 30 suits. And so to do so, he goes far into Philistine territory and he kills 30 Philistine men and takes their clothes to pay the debt. And you can see his kind of thinking. He's thinking, at least I've killed some of the enemy. They got 30 suits, but at least I got 30 of their men. And Samson comes back, he delivers the suits, and he is so mad at losing the bet to these companions that he barely knows. He wanted to prove his superiority. He didn't do that. He's so mad that he storms off in a rage. He abandons his bride. He goes home, and he just does what is right in his own eyes to do. At home, after a while, he cools down. It takes until harvest time. And at harvest time, he decides to go back and smooth things over with his bride. And so he takes a young goat with him. Think of this as taking her flowers. Apparently, in that day, if you give her a goat, all is forgiven. And so when he gets there, her father meets him and says, "Wow, ho, okay. We thought you walked out. Like you left in such a rage. We had no idea that you would be back. And so in the meantime, I've given my daughter to one of the guys that you met at the party. But, I mean, so sorry about that, but he was a really good match. And all of a sudden, he had this really nice-looking suit. I don't know how that happened. So now Samson has lost his bride, and it's devastating. And so he does what is right in his eyes to do. And he swears vengeance on all the Philistines. He even says this, the NIV says, I have a right to get even. I have a right to get even. A good picture of what happens next and the sequence would be John Wick. Any John Wick fans out there seen this franchise? Someone kills John Wick's dog, and there are 4 movies of vengeful fight scenes that result. That's basically what happens. Same here with Samson, just substitute a bride, okay? Movie 1 of Samson's vengeance is titled Samson Firefox, because he rounds up 300 foxes and he ties them by the tails in pairs. And tied to each pair of foxes was a torch. He lights the torches, he sets the firefoxes loose in the fields, and all of the most valuable crops are burned to the ground, and the Philistines are devastated for that year in the wallet. So the Philistines then retaliate. They're not going to take that, so they round up Samson's bride and her dad, and they burn the 2 alive. Now, if you remember, that was the very thing she was trying to avoid. The retaliation just meant that there would be a sequel to the movie. And so Samson learns of what they have done, and he says, if this is how you're going to play it, then I won't stop until I get every ounce of I give you every ounce of payback that you deserve. And so movie 2 is entitled Samson Hip and Thigh. Samson Hip and Thigh, because that's the description of how he hit them. Hip and thigh is a wrestling expression. It indicates a very ferocious attack. And so I can imagine that he beats the Philistines with double leg takedowns and things like that. After his win, Samson goes out to the middle of nowhere and he finds a cave to live in, because maybe there's just 2 movies. Maybe he wants to end this and stop. But no, there's a trilogy, right? Movie 3 is called Samson, Traders, and Traps. The Philistines aren't done. They get up off the mat and they change tactics. They go to Samson's own people, to the men of the tribe of Judah, and they convince the men of Judah to go get Samson for them. And so we read that 3,000 men of Judah go to find Samson as he's living out in his cave so that they could turn him over to the Philistines. Now, think about that. 3,000 men. Why did they take 3,000 men to get one guy? It's because they know the strength that they're dealing with. And they get there, and they say, Samson, why are you picking a fight with these people? We're trying to live among them and with them. Not what God wanted, by the way. He replies, I'm just doing to them what they did to me. Wow. Isn't that the line behind a lot of our conflicts? I'm just doing to them what they did to me. And everything goes downhill. The men of Judah say, we've come to tie you up and give you to the Philistines. And Samson says, okay, I'll let you do that as long as you don't intend to kill me. They say, no, we're not going to kill you. We promise we're just going to tie you up and give you to the enemy. And that's the way movie 3, Samson, Hip and Thigh, ends, the hero being led off as a captive. But everybody knows that there's another movie. John Wick is 4 movies long, and I think there's actually going to be a 5th, okay? So movie 4 is Samson Jawbone. And it begins with the victory shouts of the Philistines as Samson is led into their camp bound. But Samson has them right where he wants them because he knows that the ropes around him won't hold. And of course, he breaks them like unraveled thread and picks up the jawbone of a donkey. And this whole last movie is just one monster fight scene. And in the end, Samson stands knee-deep in blood with the bodies of 1,000 men heaped up around him. Now, Samson is a gloater. And so when the battle stops, the victory is won. Samson raises the jawbone he used to slay 1,000 men. And it's the NIV that comes closest to what is really going on in the text here. It's behind me on the screen. It says this, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys out of them. Now, this is where it's fun to read other versions. And if you'll pull the King James version out, it doesn't use the word donkeys. It kind of uses the 3-letter word or the 3-letter version of donkey, and you can guess it. You have it in your mind. And I just need you to substitute that for the word donkey in the NIV line up there, and you get the gist. You got it. After he says this, he throws down the jawbone. And you have to see that as a mic drop. That is a pre-sound system, pre-amplification mic drop. If you're a sound person, that's a pre-amp mic drop. And that was a joke for 2 people. All right. And in his celebration, note this, there's no mention of God. There's no thanks given. Samson just points to himself with a big thank me for what I did that was right in my own eyes. There's a line that happens 7 times in the book of Judges. It's this line: the people did evil in the eyes of the Lord. I want to ask, who determined what was evil? By that line, God did. God saw what the people were doing as evil. It was evil in the eyes of the Lord. And the implication is then that the people did not see it that way. The people of God didn't see anything they were doing as evil. They did whatever was right in their own eyes, and they didn't think anything was wrong to do that they did. Samson becomes a thumbnail of the whole nation, because now he's doing whatever was right in his own eyes, and he doesn't see that any of it is wrong. Last week, we covered what God's eyes expected when it came to Samson. Even before his birth, he was set apart to be a Nazirite his whole life, and it was a vow that he was meant to be set apart for God's service. There were 3 parts to the Nazirite vow, if you remember them. Number 1, he was not to cut his hair. Number 2, he was not to touch vines or eat or drink anything from vines. It was very common that a Nazirite wouldn't even touch a vine. And number 3, he was to stay away from and never touch dead things. Those were the expectations for Samson in God's eyes. Now, how did he do? You just heard the story. We saw it. He didn't care much about God's eyes. He only cared about his own eyes. He is set apart for Yahweh God, but he marries a woman who worships the Philistine god Dagon. Remember where he goes to get her? In Timnah, and specifically in the vineyard. What? Remember, in the vineyard that he shouldn't be in, he tears apart a lion until it's dead. Later, he makes a point to go back to the dead thing and touches it and shares what he touches with his parents. So now they're unclean too, but they don't know it because he doesn't tell them. He throws a party for his wedding. The word for feast that he threw is literally drinking party. And it's okay for a Nazirite to knock a few back, right? And then on top of that, he gambles while he's there. Then he's a killing machine until dead bodies are heaped up all around him. And what does he kill people with? The jawbone of a dead donkey. The only part of his Nazirite vow that he has not desecrated yet is the hair part, and that's coming. That's next week. Check in. And what Israel needed was a hero. But what they got was Samson, a man who cared more about his own eyes than God's eyes. And this is where it gets crazy confusing, because I want you to look at some of the parts that I intentionally skipped. Verse 6 of chapter 14. This is when the lion was charging him in the vineyard in Timnah. It says this: "Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him." Verse 19, this is when he lost the bet, and he had to come up with a 30 for 30. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. Chapter 15, verse 14, this is right before he made donkeys out of 1,000 men with a donkey. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. Why is Samson able to kill a lion? The Spirit of God. Why is he able to strike down 30 guys, 30 Philistines? The Spirit of God. Why is he able to heap up 1,000 dead bodies? The Spirit of God. That's crazy. hold on. It's not supposed to work like that. Now, let me pile on to this conundrum with verse 4 of chapter 14. Samson tells his parents that he's met his dream girl, right? They try to talk sense into him because she's the enemy, but he does not listen. And then verse 4 says this, his father and mother did not know that this was all from the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines. He was seeking an occasion to have an opportunity to go against the Philistine. Why does Samson marry a Philistine? Answer, the Spirit of God. God needs to create a division between his people and the Philistines, and they've been so swallowed up by this foreign culture that they are in danger now of losing their own. And if Israel gets swallowed up so that there's no longer an Israel, then guess what gets swallowed up too? The promise of a Messiah. That gets lost. And so God is saving his people by causing a divorce between them and their idols, and he's using even Samson's marriage to a godless woman to cause this division, to cause this war that will ultimately save his people. God is in control of it all. Samson is anything but a hero, but God uses him as a hero anyway. And the main lesson in the Samson story this far is this: God uses flawed people. God uses flawed people. God uses people who break vows. God uses people who are controlled by their appetites. God uses people who fraternize with idols. God uses people who act out of an ungodly character. He uses Samson, and that means he uses you and me. J.R.R. Tolkien spent his fair share of time in the trenches in World War II, and he saw the unimaginable atrocities of war, but he never lost his faith that God could turn every evil into good. And he knew that the horrific events that God uses for good are no less horrific for those who experience them. And so in one of his novels, he wrote this line: evil may yet be good to have been, and yet remain evil. That God uses us even though we're flawed does not mean that our sin doesn't matter. It still does. Evil may yet be good to have been and yet remain evil. Even when God is working, Samson is still on the hook for his sin. Even when God uses you and me, we're still on the hook for our sin. Just because God uses us in spite of our sin, even through our sin sometimes, it does not mean that we're still not responsible for it. It does not mean that we will not maybe even suffer because of it. But that he works through flawed people does mean this: that God is faithful. He's so committed to us that he will even use our own sinfulness to bring about deliverance. Now, there's a pretty great example of that. Maybe you've heard the story of the cross. The story where God sends his son into the world, he lives this perfect life, and then there are freely wicked choices of human beings that cause his son to be put to death on a cross. But because of those free, wicked choices of human beings, the whole world is redeemed from free and wicked choices. God uses flawed people. And the takeaways today, because he does, are three. Let me give you three takeaways because God uses humble people. Be humbled by what Jesus has done for you. Number one. On one hand, if we manage to do our duty, even for a few hours, we get to live life, and we live life right for a bit, then we might be tempted to say, God, I'm in a good place. I've measured up, so now you can use me. And if we say that, then we haven't learned anything from Samson. On the other hand, we could say, well, we look at Samson. I guess it doesn't matter what I do because God used Samson. God used Samson even as he's trampling over all his vows, and so he'll use me no matter what. And if we go that route, we haven't seen clearly either. It's neither I'm good enough, so use me, God, or who cares, God, so use me. Instead, it's clinging to the one who saves those who know that they haven't measured up by measuring up for them. Jesus makes it so that God can love us in the same way he loves Jesus. We're not evildoers in his eyes, but we are right in his eyes. And we have that kind of standing with God because of Jesus. And so it makes us humble. And God may work through us, but we understand that it's a gift that we do not deserve. And it's only made possible because of Jesus. Here's number 2. Rest in what Jesus has done for you. You don't have to try to repay God or earn your place with him. Jesus has paid for your sin, your flaws, and he did so in full by the work he did on the cross. Maybe some of you have known the joy of paying off a debt. Maybe you've paid off a car in your time. Maybe you've paid off your house, maybe a college loan, something like that. And when you make that last payment, you get the note, and stamped across it are the words, paid in full, right? And you know from that point on, nothing needs to be done. Nothing anymore needs to be done. And you get to rest in that. And you get to go in your backyard, and the grass just feels a little different when your house is paid off. The car could be an absolute wreck, but all of a sudden it drives a little better because it's paid off, right? And the cross is that when it comes to our sin. Jesus has done all the work. Every sin debt is covered, and all of the pressure is off, and we don't have to prove ourselves anymore so that God can be happy with us. We just get to rest in the truth that he is happy with us because of what Jesus has done. And so would you rest in what Jesus has done for you? Here's number 3. Fight the Spirit. Fight in the Spirit that Jesus has given you. Fight in the Spirit that Jesus has given you. In Romans 12, Paul gives us a perfect strategy for those of us who are dealing with the Samson syndrome, the strategy for all of our flaws. He says, don't be overcome by evil. Don't be overcome by evil. In other words, fight it. Beat evil up. When evil comes into your life, don't just accept your flaws as something normal, but punch back at them and knock them out. And to fight sin, one of our tools is that we get to look and see how much Jesus paid for us to be free of our sin. When we see that it cost his blood, his life, then we have motive now to kick sin out of our lives. And that's the power that the Spirit gives us. We see him fight for us on the cross, and we get to join him in that fight. And so consequently, we are not a part of a family that piles up dead bodies in sin all around us. That's not what we do. No, we're a part of a family that frees bodies from sin. We're a part of a family that brings bodies back to life and then adds them to the body of Christ. And that's real power. That's real strength. And so fight in the Spirit that Jesus has given you. A while back, we took a church group to Sight and Sound Theater in Branson. Anybody ever been there? A few of you? Yes? And we watched the play Samson, right? It's the drama of Samson's life. They take 3 chapters in the book of Judges, and they create a 2-hour theater production, and it was great. I can highly recommend it. But what I remember from the show is really not the show. It was the people behind us in the crowd, like directly behind us. And so my wife Amy and I and Kendall Armstrong are sitting, the 3 of us are sitting kind of away from the rest of the church group. And the best way for you to get the picture of the people behind us is just to say that they clearly came from a church where suits and ties and dresses and hats were the norm, and there probably was a lot of hand-raising going on, and I know that there was a vocally interactive sermon time, okay? You get me? If praising the Lord is wrong, then I don't want to be right. Amen, praise the Lord, glory to his name. Okay, that was the culture of the people in the row behind us. And we are at the point where Samson has just picked up the jawbone and he's struck down 1,000 men, and he's spent by that effort. I mean, you can imagine, even in all of his strength, what it takes to kill 1,000 guys. And so he's spent and he's thirsty, but there's no water to quench his thirst. And so here's Samson on stage in front of us, dying of thirst in the desert, praying to God that God would send him some water. God, surely you didn't give me this victory, this great victory, killing 1,000 guys, just to then let me die of thirst in the desert. Please, God, would you send me some water? Please send me some water. And the actor was great in front of us. He really was dying of thirst, I could tell, right? And in this moment, I hear a deep preacher voice from the seat directly behind me. And it says this, Lord, give him some water. It's not real loud, but it's loud enough. It comes again, Lord, give him some water. Here's Samson in front of us praying for water, and this guy behind me has joined him in that prayer. Lord, give him some water. And I thought, he knows it's a play, right? Like, this is a show. This is a dude portraying Samson, and this guy just came from the caverns of the backstage where I'm sure there's a green room, and there's a refrigerator in that green room that's full of water. Like, this guy doesn't need water. He's just playing a guy that needs water. It didn't matter. Lord, give him some water. I don't know. God's perspective of time is different than ours. And while we're trapped in the present, God is not. And because he's not, is it just possible that the real Samson dying of thirst in the real desert of Judges 15, is it possible that God hears, as he's praying, at the very same time, a very real prayer of a deeply faithful man sitting in row 23? Is it possible that as he prays in front of a pretend Samson who does not need water at all, that God is actually taking that prayer and applying it for the very real Samson who will die without it? I don't know, but wouldn't it be just like God to warp time and space to answer those who call out to him? Lord, give him some water. I can't let go of that, because no matter when you pray it, it's the perfect prayer. It really is. It's a prayer for you. It's a prayer for me today. Lord, give them some water. Lord, give them some water today and lead them to the fountain that overflows with life. Just like you brought Samson back from the edge of death by splitting open the earth and letting water flow out, you have now saved us from the death we sinfully chose by splitting open your Son until his blood flowed out, and that living water is available for us. Lord, give us this water. Give us the fountain that's filled with blood, drawn from Emmanuel's veins. Give us this water that works for our good, even though we are flawed and foolish. May your water revive our dead souls. May your water wash us clean. May your water bring with it your Spirit into our hearts. We are thirsty today, God. Would you give us the living water? His name is Jesus, so that we can live. And all the people said,